There you go. As the introduction mentioned, I've been working on alternative designs for many years. 1990 was, I was at UNC Charlotte and got my first little grant to start studying this topic. So for many years, we've been pushing it along and progress continues. So my real purpose here today is to kind of tell you what's new and what's different in this area. And hopefully progress continues even after today. First, a word of housekeeping. My apologies. I'm at home because I'm testing positive for COVID. I feel fine, but just can't go into the office. And then this morning, my neighbor decided to have a big tree cut down in her front yard, right outside where I am speaking here. So if you hear the sound of chainsaws or grinders going, my apologies. We'll carry on, try to get through it. It's the era we live in, I'm afraid. So back to the slides. Conventional intersections, like the one in the picture here, have four critical signal phases, and that inevitably means lots of delay, lost time, and just because the cycle is long. And relatively high crash risks, usually because there's so many conflict points in the middle of the intersection. And when the crashes happen, they're often severe. They're usually involving red light running or somebody making a bad mistake that results in an injury. Mediocre at best, pedestrian and bicyclist service at the very wide intersections, and poor signal progression because of the multi-phases. So, you know, conventional intersections, there's a lot of them out there, but they bring a lot of baggage. And so, you know, here we come with alternative intersections. Can we do better? Can we take that same intersection and reduce the impacts? And this picture is of what we call reduced conflict intersection, RCI. It's just up the street from the other one I showed you in the last slide. Some people call this a Superstreet. The Federal Highway Administration calls it an R-cut. Whatever you call it, it's an alternative, right? It's something we could do to that previous slide to try to make it better. These have emerged in the past few decades. They all involve redirecting one or more movements. In the case of this RCI, that's the minor street through and the minor street left get redirected to U-turns downstream. They reduce the conflict points, they reduce the phases, and hopefully that means less delay and fewer crashes. And hopefully that also means better situation for pedestrian and bicycle users. And I'm going to make that argument at a lot of these intersections are actually better for peds and bikes as well. So this presentation, one of the most promising alternative designs at this point, and I'm going to concentrate on at-grade 4 approach intersections, show you a few of the features of each of those, and then the real purpose here, update on what's the latest information over the past few years. And as time allows, show you a hypothetical example application. And my real purpose here is to inspire you next time you're working on an intersection, you give these a try, right? They're not perfect. They're not universal. There is no perfect intersection design. We need to be good planners and engineers, mix and match the right design at the right place. But hopefully I inspire you to try that and just don't default to the conventional. So here's the theory. I am an old professor and always need to start every talk or lecture with the theory. So here's the theory such as it is. Alternative designs work because of these 5 points. They do these 5 things and conventional designs do not. So first and foremost is minimize those conflict points, right? Top diagram there shows a conventional intersection, 32 conflict points, places where vehicle streams run into each other. Somebody has to wait, which causes delay, or they don't wait and that causes a crash, right? Conflict points are bad, minimizing them is good. The RCI at the bottom gets us down to 14 conflict points, which should mean less delay, should mean more safety. Point number 2, separate the conflict points that remain. So drivers have an easier time to get through the intersection. If you ever driven through In RCI, you know that feeling. It's easy. It's just one thing at a time, as opposed to the conventional intersection where there's multiple threats. You have to keep your head on the swivel as a driver. Number 3 is favor the through movement, the east-west road in the case of the RCI diagram here, so that they get good progression, so that they minimize their delay and they get on their way, especially in the case of a US or state numbered route that carries lots of trucks, lots of buses, that they get favored. Number 4 is to use half signals. Not all signals are created equal. A full signal stops both directions of the main street. A half signal only stops one direction of the main street. So an RCI uses half signals, and as you might know, half signals are so easy to create progression. They just fall in line with each other along the street, just like on a one-way street. Even I can time that thing, right? The progression pattern is very easy. And then fifth, final point of theory here, why the alternatives work, is they remove the signal phases. So get down from that 4 critical phases to 3, or even better in the case of the RCI, down to just 2 critical phases. That frees up lost time, that minimizes delay, that gets our pedestrians moving, that even minimizes the number of stops, which leads to safety benefit. And there's a whole bunch of good things that come when we get down to 3 or 2 critical phases. So that's the theory. That's why the alternatives work. And we can have great confidence. It's not just empirical evidence. Here's the designs I want to talk about in the next few minutes. And then concentrating really on those newer designs on the right side of the slide. As far as 2-phase design goes, that RCI that I've already shown you, and then MUT, that stands for median U-turn, or its close cousin, a bow tie design. Older 3-phase designs, we could use offset, CFI, which stands for continuous flow intersection, or a quadrant connector design that I'll show you. And then the newer designs you can see listed there. The newer ones tend to have 3 phases. I'm going to make the case here, 2-phase is always better. If we can do an RCI or do a median U-turn, fantastic. That's on delay and safety and pedestrian and pretty much any way you want to measure it. 2-phase is better, but sometimes we can't do that. The impacts are too big, the costs are too big, the public outcry is too big. So 3-phase is sort of a compromise, but it's a good compromise. And we at NCDOT are doing a lot more of these to at least do better than the conventional 4-phase. So I'll show you those in a few slides. Evaluation measures. This is motherhood and apple pie, right? This is what we usually measure on really any type of transportation improvement. Capacity, extra distances traveled, safety, of course. If we have a crash modification factor, fantastic. If we don't have that, like at a newer design, then the number of conflict points as a surrogate for what the safety record will probably be when we build a few. Extra right-of-way, and that's really a pretty good surrogate for all kind of costs and impacts. Utilities and drainage and public outcry and all kinds of things. It's usually the right-of-way we consume is a pretty good marker for those things. Pedestrian crossing quality, and that also stands in for bicyclists, and then the capability for progression along the arterial. So those are the things I'll be looking at as we move on here. A little note on the capacity. I've got a little nomenclature here that I like to use. It's basically, if you know the old critical lane volume or critical sum method, it's still in the highway capacity manual. Quick way to get at really the capacity or the V over C at an intersection. I'm gonna report the capacity as either 2L or 3L, and that means how many sort of left turn equivalents can move through the middle of the intersection. If you want to think of it as the critical sum, that's a good way to think of it as well. And lower is better in this measure. The fewer things that compete for the middle of the intersection, the higher the overall capacity is going to be. For crossing quality, I love the 20 flags method that came out 2 years ago now in NCHRP report 948. If you work in intersections, you really should be using this method to look at how well pedestrian and bicycle, for that matter, can cross at any intersection or interchange. So it really rates 13 different aspects of the ped crossing on each of the 4 crosswalks. How many yellow flags, which stand for comfort, and how many red flags, which stand for a safety impact. So the rankings that you'll see in a few slides here are based on the 20 flags method that I applied to each design. And then as far as progression goes, y'all learned that in the basic transportation engineering class. For some of us, that was many years ago. That's an old-fashioned time-space diagram, right? What I'm looking at these days, more so than ever, is the space in white in this diagram. This is an actual arterial in Belmont, North Carolina, outside of Charlotte. And I'm looking at progression at the intersections, the 2 intermediate intersections, Mercy and Holly. And I'm trying to judge, in the case of Mercy there, 33 seconds in white. Is that long enough to serve all of the movements, all of the phases that Mercy Street needs? And at Holly Street, 29 seconds, is that long enough to serve everything that's going on at Holly Street? Those to me have emerged as really the key measures of progression quality. Is there enough green to serve the minor street movements after we sort of progress the major street as well as we can? So that's the measure I'm using of progression quality in these slides. And then you turn that around, you can create a measure like this, which is to say for different designs, here's a through cut, here's a quadrant, here's a partial CFI. Sorry about the chainsaw sound in the background. At different cycle and different desired bandwidth sizes, here's the percentage of the arterial on which this design would fit. So it's kind of take the usual way of doing signal progression and turn it around and say, from a design point of view, what design in what place would not interrupt the through band. And I again, kind of like this measure over the last couple of years. I've been applying it in projects that I get to work on to see from a designer point of view, what could fit. Okay, so onward, here are the different designs. Let's compare them to a conventional design like the one pictured here. You can see the measures that I'm using in the color coding. Red is bad, green is good, yellow is in between somewhere. And a conventional intersection like the one pictured there has really poor capacity because of the 4 critical phases. It has does poorly on conflict points with 32 big conflict points, and it does poorly on progression because the side street needs too much time. Two big phases need to be served on the side street. The pedestrian movement is just okay with 28 flags rated yellow. That's mediocre. And this design does well for extra travel distance. Nobody has to travel any extra distance. And it really doesn't take up extra right of way. Of course, it's a wide right of way for all the lanes here, but once you account for that, there's no other bulb outs or crossovers or anything else. So 3 big aspects there where conventional design really falls short. And we all know that. That's decades of experience. I don't have to tell you that. All right, by contrast, an RCI, again, known as an R-cut or a Superstreet or a J-turn, look, we got rid of 2 of the red aspects, right? It's green for capacity, for conflict points, for progression. In other words, it's exactly opposite of the conventional design. It does require some drivers to travel extra distance, so that'll lead to crashes and delay. And then it's mediocre for the extra right-of-way that's needed, and for the pedestrians, turns out to be exactly the same score on the 20 flags test as a conventional intersection. So it's a trade-off, but many places that's a good trade-off. That's a trade-off worth doing to get that extra capacity and that extra safety. Speaking of safety, the crash modification factors have been in place for several years now. They are terrific. And remember, that's the ratio of after period crashes to before. So any crash modification factor under 1 is positive, is a savings. And unsignalized RCIs get you a crash modification factor of 0.6 or 0.5. And a signalized version gets you a crash modification factor of 0.8 compared to a conventional signal. So we're getting the safety. It's terrific. Not just North Carolina. It's RCIs now in about 20 states, and the safety record continues to be impressive. A couple of years ago, it occurred to me that there was a good set of CMFs out there for intersections, and that we could really turn that around and say, we kind of know what the safest intersection is at any particular place. There's enough CMFs out there that we can establish the safest intersection as a default. So I put the table together that did that, called it a SAFED, safest feasible intersection design. And here's what the table looked like, published it a couple of years ago. And if you can see there, the unsignalized RCI takes up a good slice in the middle of the table. That in those combinations of major street with 4 lanes or more, minor street with 2 lanes, and if you're below the threshold where this thing can stay unsignalized RCI is the safest thing we can do for our motorists at those particular places. And that's based on good quality published research in the CMF clearinghouse. So you can see there, always stops and roundabouts are the safest things at small intersections, and median U-turn becomes the safest thing at large intersection. But RCI has a nice slice in the middle of the table. That was based on total crashes. On injury crashes, the pattern changes a little bit. Still, unsignalized RCI is a nice slice in the middle of this table as well. The big difference for injury crash is that 2-lane roundabout is a better way to go. Takes over for median U-turn at some combinations there, but otherwise pretty much the same table. So in my humble opinion, we should default to the safest design, right? Why would you have a default design that's not the safest for our planner and designer friends out there? Our website, NCDOT, says safety is #1. We should act like it and have a default design that is the safest thing based on this research. Okay, onward. Median U-turn that I mentioned already. Here's a picture of one of the 3 of them that we have in North Carolina. The idea here is no left turns at the main intersection. All of the left turns go down to a U-turn crossover that's usually located on the major street. And this is a superb design. As you saw, it's safest in many combinations, especially at a larger intersection. Terrific for capacity, for conflict point, which equates to safety, and for pedestrians. When you get rid of the left turns at the main intersection, turns out that's for bicyclists too. That's the best way to get a ped or a bike across a big intersection is to create a median U-turn. Bow tie is a very similar design to a median U-turn that uses roundabouts instead of U-turn crossovers. So really operates much the same. Median U-turn, again, not so good for extra travel distance. Okay for right-of-way. There's worse designs out there. You still need the 2 U-turn crossovers, which usually have bulb outs at the end of them. And just mediocre for progression. That it needs a full signal rather than the RCI half signal. But there's a lot to like with the median U-turn design. They've been used in my home state of Michigan for decades, and there's a few popping up in other states. Utah, for instance, has put a few in the ground. We have many in design across North Carolina, 3 open so far. And you can see the crash modification factors are relatively recent. Here's a piece of new information that came out just a couple of years ago. We never had a crash modification factor that we could trust until just a couple of years ago. And then when it came in, it was terrific at 0.7 for total crash and 0.6 for injury crash. Scores well on the SSI. That I should mention that SSI is the Safe Systems for Intersections that Federal Highway developed a few years ago. Basically another safety surrogate method, and it kind of confirms the crash modification factor. So last year I published 2 more tables that go along with the SAFED table. I call them POFID and BOFID. The Pedestrian Optimum Feasible Intersection Design, POFID. And that's to apply the 20 flags method and see which design minimizes the number of flags, especially red flags. And so it's not a complex idea here. Just again, why would we default to a design that is not the best we can do? And you can see in the middle and the right side of the chart for bigger intersections, median U-turn or its close cousin bow tie is the best thing we know how to do for a pedestrian. If you have to have pedestrians crossing a big intersection, median U-turn is the best thing that you can do for them. The shaded cells represent when the pedestrians and bicyclists have the same outcome, and a red lettering means the safest design as well. So you can see they're a happy combination. Some of these cases, always stop, roundabout, median U-turn, you get safety, you get good ped service, and you get good bicyclist service with that choice. So again, why would you default to conventional, knowing all of that? Here is the bicyclist chart, BOFID, and as you can see, again, a lot of overlap between this chart and the pedestrian and the safety charts. Okay, here is the bow tie. Like I mentioned, it's a close cousin of the median U-turn. Again, all 4 left turns redirected. And in this case, they use roundabouts instead of U-turn crossovers. And usually the roundabouts are on the minor street rather than the major street. So nobody's opened one yet. Me and the former student invented the bow tie 1994, been a few years. Nobody's built one yet, but I think it's a race now. North Carolina and Virginia DOT both have bow ties well into the design and environmental stages, and hopefully they'll get under construction soon. So we'll see who cuts the ribbon first. We don't have crash data yet, but we suspect they're going to be very safe when they open because of the conflict points and because roundabouts themselves are quite safe. All right, onward, other type of designs, the offset T intersection, shown in the picture here, a case we have in Raleigh. Yeah, you can see on the measures there, mostly mediocre, capacity, pedestrian, progression. It's worth a trade-off versus a conventional 4-legged at some places. There's a lot of places in North Carolina, we try to protect the 4th leg, not to let some developer or some city come in and put a 4th leg at the intersection. 3 legs are always better than 4. But to go all the way to the full offset design, you can see there, we give up a lot on the other side. NCDOT just sponsored research on this topic that got published a year or 2 ago. This is relatively new information. Again, that's my job here today. But we're a little disappointed in the result. It didn't come out as promising as we had hoped. The CFI, continuous flow intersection, shown in the picture there, the one CFI we have open in North Carolina, that's a partial version because it's got left turn ramps on 2 of the 4 approaches. A full CFI would have all 4 left turns being redirected to those ramps. So I hope you can get the idea from the picture. The idea there is to take the left turns and move them over to the left prior to the main intersection. And then the left turns can move at the main intersection. Left turns can move at the same time as the through movements. So you get to a three-phase operation at the main intersection. You get good capacity out of this one, no extra travel distance. So it's really efficient. This is really done for capacity purposes. And in places like this where the competitor is really, if you didn't do this, we'd have to build a bridge. We'd have to go to a grade separation. But you give up a lot. You can see there are three big red aspects. It takes up a lot of extra right of way. Not great for pedestrians. I don't think it's unsafe. It just takes a long time to get across using the walk buttons. And it's also not good for progression along the main street. So there's a big trade-off there for sure. Great capacity, but you give up some other aspects. There's about 40 of these in the US at this point. We do have more planned in North Carolina. There's some places where that's a trade-off worth making. You know, basically we're not going to have pedestrians. We're not going to have driveways. Got access control, but we need the capacity. So, you know, it's definitely on our menu. And in North Carolina, we'll use a few more CFIs over the next few years, I think. The new information here is we now have a CMF for it. It's a good research that just got completed recently, where the total and injury crash CMF came in at 0.9. So this is not a safety countermeasure. It's for capacity, but it won't hurt you in safety. So that's a pretty good trade-off. Quadrant design shown in the picture here is a quadrant in Virginia. And the idea here is no left turns at the main intersection. All of the left turns are rerouted to that connector road. Three-phase signals at the ends of the connector road. There's only a few of these in the ground now. Again, there's more being planned, more being built. The new information here is a recent Federal Highway informational guide on the quadrant intersection. So that just appeared a little over a year ago, and provides really good information on the quadrant. I'm listed as a co-author. That was really generous by the main author was Jonathan Reeds, who some of you know, and is really championing this design, and he did a great job with the informational report. You can see the measures on the right side of the slide. What this gives you is great pedestrian and bicyclist service in a place where you're also moving a lot of traffic. So the capacity is quite good. The pedestrian service is superb, but you give up some other aspects there. You see the conflict points. Again, you know, we're not really expecting this one to be a safety countermeasure. Hopefully it doesn't cost us extra crashes. There's extra travel distance, and then the right of way is the big impact. A lot of right of way for that connector road. All right, onto a new one. I don't think this has been open anywhere. We have two of these planned in North Carolina. I know there's also one in Alaska. There's a sort of a version of this in Virginia. It's a combination of CFI and median U-turn. CFI, remember, continuous flow intersection. So in the diagram here, if you can make that out, the northbound left turn in this particular case is a very heavy movement. So that got put on the CFI ramp. And then the southbound left turn, not heavy. And you sort of take advantage of the available space there to put in a U-turn crossover. And that gets you at the main intersection down to a three-phase signal. And all of a sudden means that, remember where the CFI was relatively poor for pedestrian service, this thing is relatively good for pedestrian. So you get pretty good capacity, only one redirected movement, the median U-turn movement, and hopefully that's a smaller demand. And only 24 flags for pedestrian, good pedestrian and bicycle service. So we kind of like this one. This one looks like it has potential. We think there'll be more than two of these in North Carolina, and hopefully other states will catch on as well to take the CFI and kind of smooth off some of the rough edges there. I mentioned it before, you know, compromising with a three-phase design, but compromise that makes sense in some places. And then here's another one of those compromises, partial median U-turn. And this one allows the direct left turn from the minor street, but redirects the left turns on the major street. So median U-turn redirects all 4 left turns. Sometimes that's kind of harsh. Sometimes the stakeholders are going to object, and we won't, really they'll prohibit us from putting that in. So here's a compromise that says, well, you can have your left turn out, but let us get to a 3-phase design, and we can still do some business here. So pretty good for capacity, outstanding for pedestrian, just like the full median U-turn version. And then the other aspects there are not too bad. Extra travel distance, conflict points. We don't have any crash data on this yet because there's only one that we know of that's been built in the US. But when the crash data come in, they'll probably show a pretty good safety record. And we do need the 2 bulb outs, but that's not too terrible. So this is one of those kind of compromised 3-phase designs that I think we're going to turn to in the future to sort of thread the needle at a lot of project sites. And then here's a version of that, basically the mirror image, redirects the left turns from the minor street, but allows the left turns from the major street. Again, two U-turn crossovers, but a 3-phase signal, kind of a softer version of what you got with the full median U-turn. Look on the right side there. There's no red. There's no, and not even any pink, right? There's no really bad aspects to this, relatively speaking. Great for pedestrian and mediocre for everything else. And believe me, now having worked at the DOT for a few years, we'll take mediocre. In a lot of cases, mediocre beats the heck out of the poor designs that are in the field right now. So again, this sort of version of the partial median U-turn 3-phase design, I think we'll use a good bit in the next few years. And then there's this one. And of all the new designs that I know of, I think this one is got the most promise. I think this one is the one that's really going to join the sort of upper ranks with RCI and median U-turn and CFI, and really become common. The through cut design, it redirects the minor street through movement, and hopefully you can get a sense of that in the picture here. No more minor street through movement. They get redirected to downstream U-turn crossovers, or if we do our planning well and do our access management well, there's other ways to get out of those side streets and complete the side street through movement. If you got a good set of backage roads and can sort of redirect traffic just using the existing connecting roads without having to build bulb outs, that's the best thing of all. So you can see the impacts on the right side there. It's a good increase for capacity. It's superb for progression down the street because we're down to a 3-phase signal, but the minor street phase is only a relatively short left turn phase. So that's a lot of green time for the main street. And that's, if you remember that chart from a few slides ago, I think that through cut design is actually going to be able to slot in a lot of places along our arterials and not affect the progression band. Decent for extra travel distance, decent for conflict points. We've only got a little bit of crash data in so far. When the crash data come in, I expect that there'll be a nice healthy CMF on these, and not too much extra right of way. And it's, like I said, especially in cases where we can get rid of the bulb outs, we should be in good shape here. Pedestrian, not great. Actually, there's no pedestrians moving across the main street at this one. That's been in Charlotte for a few years. This one, I think it's entrance to a big software company, and I think they did it just to create room for their fountain. On the one side, you can see there, mostly architectural, but it seems to work from a traffic point of view pretty well. This one, relatively new design outside of Raleigh in a suburb called Holly Springs. And you can see the pedestrian crossing there, diagonal, similar to RCI. So the pedestrian score that I gave you a couple slides ago wasn't great, but that was assuming a two-stage crossing at the usual places. With the diagonal crossing, actually, I think the pedestrian score is better. And that's pretty good service across a big, wide main street. So I like this one a lot. I like it for outside of schools, outside of places like software or factory kind of thing with a big surge of traffic. I like it in development in a lot of places. In this case, on the minor street, on one side serves the Walmart, on the other side serves the Target. And it turns out there's just not a lot of drivers that need to get from Walmart to Target. And as a DOT, I'm not sure that's our highest priority anyway. So severing that minor street through movement, I think is a compromise that in a lot of places people will be willing to make and to live with. And it gets us to 3 phases, gets us extra capacity, gets us great progression, does those other things that we're looking for. Virginia DOT is excited about through cuts. You can see a plan they've got there for an important road in Virginia to convert basically all of the signals on a 43-mile corridor to be through cut. And I wish them well with that. I think that's going to be a good project. I've got to wrap things up here. I've got an example application, but I think in view of the time, I'm going to kind of skip through that and get to the summary here, and then open up for a few minutes for question. I see we've got one that came in. Hopefully there'll be others. My summary is that unconventional alternative designs are here to stay. And the 2-phase signals, RCI, median U-turn, bow tie, are the best, right? On the things we can measure, the things we care about, especially safety. Two-phase with those designs is almost always the best we can do, but sometimes we can't. Sometimes the impacts are too much. Sometimes the stakeholders have too strong a reaction, and 2-phase is out of our grasp. So maybe we can compromise with the 3-phase designs, and those are really the main new ones that I was trying to present to you here today. I think there's many. I gave you a sample. There's more than that out there. The menus are actually quite large, but I think there's some good viable alternatives, and almost all aspects, they're better than the conventional 4-phase, especially for safety, but also for capacity, progression, and other aspects. Here's the chart that in a color coding kind of tries to summarize what that looks like. The conventional design on the left, remember 3 big red aspects there that really cause those intersections not to work that well. And then most of the other designs with 1 red and a couple of designs with no red aspects there. That is nothing that's really terrible about that design. And so, nothing's perfect. We're going to have to make compromise. We always do. That's what they pay us for. But when we compromise, at least we have some things we can turn to try to mitigate the worst aspects here. Future research, since this is a research conference and I am an old researcher, we always need more CMFs. That's always there. Anybody that can, good quality CMFs, 3 stars or better in the clearinghouse, but if you can develop a CMF for us, that's gravy. That's outstanding. And where we don't have a CMF, we could use a good safety surrogate out of a microsimulation model, or however you do it, to help us try to measure what's the safety impact of a new design, like the one on the right there that I published last year. Got a contraflow feature, if you see the pattern there. Is that thing going to be safer? Well, I don't know. I think so. I can measure conflict points, but we need a good surrogate for safety for new design like that. We need to optimize traffic control devices. That's signs, signals, markings for new designs to make sure we're doing the best we can with them. There's always interest in mixing designs along a corridor. Federal Highway has an ongoing project on that right now, but I'm sure they're not going to be the last word on it. Is it okay to mix designs? What about mixing 3 designs, 4 designs? What about a new design at every intersection? And then we all need to keep thinking about this, like the double contraflow design that I'm showing you here. I think there's more out there. And if we put pen to paper, we could probably come up with some that makes sense. There's still left to be discovered. So I really appreciate the chance to talk with you this morning. I think alternative to intersection designs are here to stay in all niches, and that includes grade separated and interchange as well. The progress continues, the menu expands, lots of good future research opportunities here. Keep pushing the envelope, and I know several of you have, and appreciate that. And let's continue to do that. There's my contact information. Intersections, what I do, interchanges. So call me or email me if you want to talk intersections. That's what I love to do, and I appreciate the chance to do that so far this morning. I'm gonna stop sharing here, Wei, and turn over. If I see a couple of questions popping up, if you want to moderate that.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Hammer, for your very wonderful and informative presentation. So we have a couple questions from the Q&A chat. I think the first one is, great presentation, lots of useful information. Could we have a copy of your presentation?
Oh, of course. I'll email it to you. I thought I did that already, but I will email that to you, Wei.
Okay, thank you.
And then, well, anybody can find me and email me too. That either way, but I'll send it to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I will forward it to the audience. And the second question is, how about the driver acceptance levels for those alternative designs?
Yep. That's a great question, and that's why that was on my list of future research opportunities to really optimize the signs, signals, markings, the traffic control devices. Yes, drivers hate new things. So when we put the first one of anything out there, they're gonna hate it. They're gonna yell at us. They're gonna complain. We as planners and engineers have to hang tough, and if it's the right design in the right place, we have to overcome that. We have to try to educate our drivers. Websites and presentations like this and et cetera, to try to help educate the drivers. Certainly, some of these designs are easier to drive than others. And if somebody comes up with a measure of that, that would be terrific. I have my opinions. I think RCI is very easy to drive. I said that early in the slides. We're not really asking the drivers to make maybe one big decision. On the other hand, that the quadrant intersection has always concerned me in that aspect. There's a lot of decisions there. There's some really unusual maneuvers where you turn right to turn left kind of thing. That's my opinion. It would be great to have a measure of that. We've never really developed that. So there's a research opportunity that's out there. Some good work in driver simulator to get at this aspect would help. So it's definitely always a concern, always will be. We can't let that stop us. If we let that stop us as engineers, we might as well go home, because our job is to do new things. And if they won't let us do new things, we ought to go pencils down and time to retire. We can't let that stop us, but we have to do good research, do good education, do good traffic control devices. It's a good question. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah. So any more questions from the audience?
Dr. Hummer, just a comment. I'm in Austin, Texas, which is a well-known traffic problem area. We have 2 continuous flow intersections in the vicinity of Austin. One is near right outside Austin, and it was installed basically to improve capacity. And so I think it works very well, but driver acceptance has been a problem and still is. So anyway, we live with it, but nevertheless, I think the intersection has done a good job. And I think it has improved safety. I think it definitely has increased capacity.
Yep.
This location, very high volume, very high demand intersection. And I think it's worked quite well, but drivers don't like it.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Yeah, the CFI in Charlotte, on the northwest side of Charlotte, it's the only one for 500 miles in any direction. I mean, that's tough, right?
Right.
Get drivers to understand that thing, and that one has suffered. In this aspect too, there's a lot of drivers that don't understand that they're supposed to initiate their left turn much sooner than they would at conventional intersection. So they go up to the middle of the intersection and then try to make the left turn, and they're blocking everybody and causing chaos and crashes. That's a little bit on us to sign it better and to place them better where there's better sight distance, better visibility. But it's also on us. Let's not put one of a kind in there. If we really mean it, let's put a half a dozen in, give them a chance to learn this thing. Like roundabouts, roundabouts now, there's what, 9,000 of them around the US. North Carolina's got about 500. They're not really new anymore. Drivers have had a chance to learn it, and we still get some grumbles, but there's enough of them out there where most drivers now have seen it and kind of, at least begrudgingly accept it. So, but yeah, when you put in the first one, that's tough. That's the tough thing to ask of your drivers. Thanks.
That's exactly right. We did a roundabout study for TxDOT a few years ago, probably 10 years ago. And at that time, we did an inventory of roundabouts in the state of Texas. We found 19. That was it, the whole state. Now they're all over the place.
Yep. And now drivers have a much better chance to learn it when there's more on the ground. North Carolina, we have a lot of RCIs. We lead the world in RCIs. And NCDOT did such a smart thing in the early days of that program now, like 15 years ago, is we put in a whole corridor at a time. We didn't mess around with one or two. We put in 6 at a time. Like, we really mean this thing and we really want you to learn it. And that really helped. Easier said than done, but where you can do that really helps.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Hammer. I really appreciate your time and grateful to you for your continued support of CAMMSE. So I know you're busy, it's very packed. Please feel free to leave anytime as needed. You're certainly more than welcome to stay with us a bit longer if you're scheduled.
The chainsaws have stopped outside my window now, so I can hear what you're saying. So I think I'll stay for a while. Very good.
Mostly importantly, we hope you get well soon, sir.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So at this point, we're going to move directly to our first technical session on advanced model for transportation planning and operation. So the moderator will be Dr. Randy Machemehl from University of Texas, Austin. So I would like to take this opportunity to remind you all, and especially our moderators of all sessions, to please help manage the time and not let any session overrun. So Dr. Machemehl, please take it away, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. This is technical session 1. We have 4 presentations. I'll be doing one of them. I think the other 3 will be great. I don't know about mine, but anyway, 4 technical presentations. We're going to deal with a variety of topics. The first of those presentations is going to be given by Dr. John Ivan, University of Connecticut, and his topic is estimation of pedestrian compliance at signalized intersections considering demographic and geographic factors. Now, I'll just add, we just did a study for the city of Austin looking at pedestrian and driver compliance at pedestrian crossings at 17 locations in Austin. And our conclusion was that drivers in Austin tend not to comply very well with the guidance that is provided at the intersection. So John's going to look more at the pedestrian side of the issue. So John, take it away.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to start my video, but the host is not letting me. So, you know, if you want, I don't mind not looking at, but anyway, that's why I'm not on. So there we go. Okay. And I guess I can also share. There we go. Actually, no, we gotta go. All right, do you see my slideshow now?
Sure.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk about this project that we did, funded by CAMMSE. This is a second phase of a project we did last year, and I presented in the fall last year for this presentation. I presented some preliminary results, and now this is the final analysis here. The main thing in phase 2 was we added some additional data. So the motivation of the project is that as we want to increase walking as a main mode of transportation, that's something that we want to do for improving livability and also, of course, for concern for reducing emissions. But one of the issues there is pedestrians, when pedestrians' use of intersections impacts the operation of the intersection. And also safety as well. And so it's going to be helpful to understand how demographic and land use variables influence pedestrian compliance. Understanding more about pedestrian compliance is going to be useful so that we can try to make sure that the pedestrians are crossing safely and without disrupting the traffic flow. So, for example, an example we don't want is this guy running across the street on the don't walk signal. What we want is people to be crossing when the light says to walk and it's time for them to go. And I also want to mention one other thing. One of the comparisons we're doing in this project is compliance with different type of signal phasing. So we have concurrent phasing and exclusive phasing in Connecticut. And I think this is common other places too. I think from my experience, most concurrent is more common elsewhere. Exclusive phasing is more common in Connecticut, which is why it was a major issue for us to look at this. So with concurrent phasing, the pedestrians are supposed to cross at the same time as the green light in the direction where they're going, in the direction of the vehicles in which they're crossing. So the pedestrians cross with the vehicles. With exclusive phasing, the pedestrians have their own phase for crossing all crosswalks, and all the vehicles are stopped. And then after the pedestrians, if the walk phase is over, then the signal returns to regular operation. So we collected so this data we're collecting are from some previous projects that we're just essentially we're finding more ways to use this data. And in particular, we wanted to add some new data this time, though, some more characteristics of these intersections. So there are 152 crosswalks at 42 intersections in 4 towns in Connecticut. So these archived on-site observations, we got the pedestrian crossing behavior and their signal compliance and interactions with vehicles, which would be what we observed there. Primarily, we were interested in the interactions with the vehicles, but in doing that, we also got the pedestrian compliance. So that was helpful. So what we're adding now is some GIS and network data to get some additional variables. So previously, when we had looked at this, we only used some of the physical attributes of the intersection. So now we're adding in population densities, the land use densities in the area around the intersections. And also we got information about poverty ratio to see if that might be affecting the rate at which people are compliant. So as I mentioned, there was, as an example here, for this intersection, we collected the GIS data in buffers. So for example, you see we have, we did buffers for a quarter, an eighth of a mile buffer, a quarter of a mile buffer, and 1/2 mile buffer to represent different possibilities for walking distance from the intersection. And so we tested the variables calculated for each of those areas to see which one might work the best. And so, for example, one of the things we looked at was land cover density. And so this comes from the National Land Cover Database. And we have developed, so there's 3 different levels here. There's a developed with low intensity area, and then there's a middle intensity, and then a high density area. There's also some that would be more rural. See, when it's white, that means there's negligible development there. So you can see within the walking distance from the intersection, we calculated how many of the cells are at each of those different levels. And then we also got data from the census. We have the population living within those areas. And so that was calculated as we calculated the population density in the weighted population density in each of those buffer sizes. And then we did the same thing for poverty ratio. So we're getting the weighted average of that in each of the buffer sizes. So overall, for the discrete variables, we have 36% of the intersections were concurrent and 64% were exclusive. As I mentioned, that's more common in Connecticut. And then we looked at some other things like this. Here's some distributions of the speed limit, whether or not there was parking, crosswalks. Most of the intersections did have crosswalks, and then also the weather at the time of the observations. And then also presence of sidewalks, and then we're controlling for the day of the week as well, in case there was something different in the compliance because of that. And then for the different buffer sizes here, we have different ranges for these are more continuous variables. So we have different ranges for the high density land use area, the population density, and the poverty ratio. Notice some places had no high density area, so the minimum is 0. And the same thing for the 1/8 mile buffer. There were a lot more zeros because it was because of the smaller area. So there's less diversity of the land use. Then we have what we calculated was the log odds of the pedestrian compliance. So for each particular pedestrian overall at an intersection where what was the pedestrian compliant or not. So we have what proportion of them were compliant. That's our response variable. And then we have crossing distance. We used the square root of the AADT was found to be the best for representing that. And then we also have the pedestrian volume per hour and the square root of the vehicular volume. So the difference there is the AADT was the overall calculated for that time. The average vehicle volume was what was observed during the observation time period. So as I mentioned, we did a log linear regression of the log odds ratio. So the first we had the observations, we aggregated them for each crosswalk, calculated the percentage of compliance, then the odds of compliance, and now this Y is the log of the odds of relaxed compliant, odds of the compliance. So one of the things we had to do is, because if we had any zeros, there were some that were all compliant or not. That didn't work. So we did this small transformation to get the numbers away from 0 and 1. SAS proc reg was used to do the analysis. And one of the things that happened, we did some test of correlation, of spatial correlation. And so because of that, we inserted some dummy variables to account for some spatial correlation that we saw, for the homogeneity we saw. As well, there are some locations that just had a very extreme situation with their compliance, and so we didn't want them to avoid having some other kind of bias there. We just let them, those intersections, we gave them their own variable to just let that effect be taken care of, and so then we could also so we could really so it would not taint the ability to find the other effects. But yeah, we didn't have to take those cases out. So at any rate, the half mile, we did this for variables from the half mile buffer, the quarter mile, and the eighth mile. I'm just going to show the results from the quarter mile buffer because this is what these turned out to be the best, and they're very similar. All three of them are very similar. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you this. The model fit fairly well. Certainly it passed the F test quite substantially, and it's a decent R squared as well. And the root MSE, mean square error, is not bad. So one at a time here. So what we found was if there was middle density or low density area, as that increased, there was higher compliance. And when there was a crosswalk, there was higher compliance. There was less compliance as the population density increased. When there was a sidewalk, the compliance decreased. When there's exclusive signal phasing, it was less compliant. I'm going to get to that in a moment. And then the high density area as well. And then most days of the week besides Thursday, which was the base, they were all lower. And then as I mentioned, there were a few of these individual crosswalks and intersections that had some particular shared, for example, we had multiple crosswalks at the same intersection. So these particular intersections had some special effects that had to be accounted for. So then we also, because of this issue with the exclusive phasing, we also redefined the compliance at the exclusive phase signals as being compliant if the pedestrian crossed on the green light, which is what it would have been if it was a concurrent. It would have been compliant if it was a concurrent intersection, but because of the way the signal, the walk and don't walk phase was implemented, it's not compliant. And in this case, the signal type became insignificant. So that's clearly, there's clearly a difference in the compliance with that kind of phasing. And most of these others are very similar findings with the middle and low density. And then again, with the different times of the day, the population density and so forth still being negative. So overall, our findings. So we found that a high density land use and high population density compared to the low and medium, these decrease or these reduce the compliance at the signal. So what's likely to be happening here is we believe that there's probably more pedestrians in those areas. There's a lot more density, so there are more pedestrians, and the pedestrians take more risks in these kinds of areas, possibly because of a safety in numbers philosophy, but it's just the fact that it's just a more dense area. And it's possibly because the vehicle speeds are higher, and so the pedestrian are lower in those areas compared to the low and medium density locations. And so again, the pedestrians feel that it's safer to take the risks. Interestingly, the crosswalks and the concurrent phasing, again, as I mentioned, the concurrent phasing is higher. Most likely it's because there's less wait for the legal walk phase. And so pedestrians, they don't have to wait as long to get the walk signal. And so they'll cross on the green. So the poverty level we found was not significant. We suspect that that effect was captured by the high density. And so there's probably some correlation there. And the effect was more the high density than the poverty level was the one that was really what's explaining the, but I think it is important to note that, of course, because that is going to be an effect on, that is going to be a diversity effect. And so the quarter mile buffer fit the best of all of the models. And so we believe that probably best represents the area from which the pedestrians use the intersection to really explain that's really describing the people who are observing. So some suggestions we came up with for future research. We'd like to we always want more data. We did do some extra observations this past summer. There weren't very many, or I'm sorry, not this summer, the summer before, which is when we were doing the research. So we did get some observations of the pedestrian wait time, but it was on a smaller number of cases. And so we weren't really able to add those cases in because it didn't really help. and there weren't enough to really do the analysis by themselves. But we believe that noting the wait time, that might explain the difference, might explain the concurrent exclusive effect, rather than it just being the type of signal. That probably explains what's really going on. And we might see some differences then within the concurrent signals as well for a long cycle length. And also, one of the questions is these observations were all made before the pandemic, except for the ones, of course, this past summer, the summer before. So what we wonder if compliance may be changing since the pandemic. And most of our observations were done in the summer for that previous study. So there could be a seasonal effect, which would be interesting to note at other times of the year. And the other thing we'd like to do is additional geographic variables. So maybe using income and education instead of the poverty ratio might be helpful. That might be better, that might be capturing the differences better. Vehicle ownership of the area, that might affect people's attitudes about how they walk. And then also looking at how much, knowing the amount of walking in the area, to include the walking and maybe the transit mode splits, because there'll be more pedestrians in those cases. And I think that's it. Yep, that's it for my presentation. So I'm happy to take any questions people have.
See, do we have questions? Any questions? I just offer a comment. Your conclusion that pedestrian compliance is not as good in high density areas fits perfectly with some work we did for textile a long time ago. We looked at pedestrian compliance. We didn't do anything like what you did here, but I do remember that the worst compliance tended to be in the highest density areas. For example, right around our campus, we got the poorest pedestrian compliance. And of course, the density is very high here.
Right.
That fits perfectly with your conclusions.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that, Randy. I think that this isn't really a earth-shattering finding, I would say, but I think it's good to, it's interesting to confirm that and just to understand what your benchmark, what you can really expect. And because understand, so that if that's the case, what might we do in those locations? That's probably where you want to do more to try to encourage pedestrians to be compliant, if that's what you want. Or, as I said, maybe set things up so that they're, basically pedestrians have a task to do. They want to get across the street. So if we make that easier for them to do it, and when we want them to do it, then I think then you're going to have better compliance. But this is telling you where it's a problem.
Yes, sir. Any other questions or comments?
Hey, John, this is Joe Hummer.
Hi, Joe.
Good stuff. Were there any design related factors that you looked at?
Yeah, so that was the stuff that was significant. So what do you mean by design?
Things like presence of a median or curb radius, perhaps?
There was not much variation in median at these locations. And so that was not significant.
Okay.
And what was it? What was the other one you asked?
Curb radius.
We did not observe that. And as I think about where these intersections are, I don't think there was a very big variation in that. I thought that we had crossing distance in there, and that doesn't seem to have been significant on this one. Yeah. Those things were, I don't think there was a lot of variation on those factors. And so it's not likely that they would have turned up.
Yep, fair enough. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it very much.
All right, thank you.
Our second presentation, and I'm going to have a problem here with the speaker's name. I believe, and correct me, please, Xiaoji Liu, is that close?
Yeah, very close.
All right, well, thank you. Xiaoji is with the Qinzhou University of Aeronautics, and the presentation title is a simulation study on the traffic delay and fuel consumption of connected and autonomous vehicles in Superstreet with platooning, signal optimization, and trajectory planning. Sounds like a very, very interesting topic. Please take it away. Xiaoji, you're ready to go. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Just trying to bring up my PowerPoint. Okay, now can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so thanks for Randy's introduction. So essentially, I just did the whole of CAV simulation experiment for the in the Superstreet and conventional intersection, and just trying to do some comparison, find some interesting results. First, a little bit of background information about Superstreet. So the traffic flow in the Superstreet is quite different from the ones in the conventional intersection, especially for the SUV vehicle and the left-hand vehicle in the minor street. As you can see, the left-hand vehicle and the SUV vehicle will have to make a right turn in the main intersection and make another left turn in the minor intersection to go through this intersection system. So as for rest of the movement, there isn't much difference. So I will just skip them. As you can see, the vehicle should go through at least 2 intersections for them to traverse the intersection. And for CAVs, CAV can improve the safety, traffic efficiency, and reduce pollutions. And these benefits often come from the shorter headways and optimal speed trajectories, and their accurate maneuvering over the vehicle. Then they can reduce the crashes caused by human errors. So my research objectives are to examine the performances of CAVs with different features, including platooning, adaptive signal control, and the trajectory planning on the adaptive signal control. And of course, I will consider different traffic scales in these 2 environments. So for the basic car following characteristic, I use the intelligent driver model to describe their fundamental car following characteristics. This model is first proposed by Trieber in 2000, and this model calculates target acceleration rates by the velocity, the gap to the preceding vehicle, and the velocity difference to the preceding vehicles. And it has some advantages. First, it is collision-free, and second, it has intuitively measurable and easy to interpret parameters. So these parameters values can be detected by the like radar or other kind of sensor technology. And this model also allows for faster numerical simulation. For the IDM parameter, I mostly use the default parameter. And here we go, the platooning. I first touched the popular model-based platooning control logic introduced by Rajamani. And so this model allows the following vehicle dynamically adjust its speed to keep a short distance to the preceding vehicles. As you can see, this model requires the input of acceleration of the preceding vehicle, acceleration of the leader vehicle, speed of subject vehicle, acceleration of subject vehicle, and the preceding vehicle length. And there are also some parameter values you need to set up, and I show them in the table in the left lower corner. As the damping ratio and bandwidth reflect how frequent and how fast this following vehicle can react to the change of the preceding vehicle. And the acceleration weighting factor and the desired gap we set at 5 meters, which is the default value in the model. And the distance boundary for platooning is 20 meters. So I did a small numerical study to examine how this platooning control works in the simulation. So I set up 2 vehicles inside a platoon, and I set a third vehicle. This vehicle is gonna try to catch up the platoon of 2 vehicles. with a speed of 20 meters. As you can see, these two figures show how the speed changes of the third vehicle and how the gap changes. You can see the third vehicle is increasing sharply to catch up the planetoid ahead. And when it reaches a certain distance, it decreases speed and keep the same speed as the platoon speed ahead. And you can also see the gap error. Gap error is a gap minus the desired gap, which is 5 meters. You can see when it's about time, the gap error can decrease to 0, which is pretty what we desire. However, this control also have some problem because it has a really slow approaching rate to a stopped vehicle. If we have a stopped vehicle in front of the intersection, and we can see the vehicle controlled by this platooning control logic approach the stopped vehicle really slowly compared to the other vehicle. Here I present the IDM control and the platooning control vehicle show how quickly they can approach to a stopped vehicle. As you can see, it takes 20 seconds for IDM control to reach a desired distance to the stopped vehicle. However, it takes 30 seconds for the platooning control. So this is a problem. This is our problem because we are going to see a lot of stopped vehicle in front of the intersection, especially in the superstreets. So this prevent us applying the same platooning logic in the superstreet environment. So I divided the platooning situation into two cases. First is when the vehicle approaching to the intersection, since it can meet stop vehicle. So I adopted the concept of a trajectory copy introduced by Han in 2020. So the trajectory copy is quite simple. It just defines the following vehicle speed as the platoon leader speed is copied. They are same, and this mechanism can take effect when the following when their interdistance is less than 1 second ahead away plus the minimum gap 2.5 meters, and after the vehicle exits the intersection, then the Rajamani platooning control logic can take effects and it can form really close platoon nicely. So that's for the platooning control. Here we move to the adaptive signal control logic. Adaptive signal control, naturally, I try to minimize the traffic delay for all the vehicle from all the approaches. So I added two constraints so that the graduation can be sufficient for the vehicle arrivals from all approaches. This constraint can make the graduation and the restart time unexpectedly large. So I add a penalty to these two variables in the objective function to balance their magnitude. And the last three constraints I leverage the benefit of the big M techniques so that the phase sequence can be optimized. So this optimization model is quite simple and has a nice form that is convenient for popular or commercial solver to solve. In this research, I utilize the groupie to obtain the solution in real time. That's a core logic for adaptive signal control, and other than that, I use the ruling horizon scheme to update the vehicle arrival information. The interval is the cycle length, and for filling up a cycle is that when I was doing the experiment, I found that when there are few vehicles in front in the minor intersection, the signal can switch very frequently, and I think this might cause some problem like extra wear for the signal display equipment. So when when the signal detected there is only one vehicle in the cycle in the planning horizon, so it will fill up the whole green for these vehicles to avoid the frequent signal switch. So another one, the last one is the emergency release. So since they are unbalanced, the traffic volume in the environment of Superstreet, so chances are that the vehicle from the minor intersection might wait excessive long time. So I added emergency release scheme is that when vehicle have waited for 2 standard cycle lengths, which is 240 seconds, then the signal should turn green for a sufficient duration so that the vehicle can pass the intersection to avoid the spillback and improve the traffic efficiency and equity. That's for the adaptive signal control logic. And then the last one is the trajectory planning. The trajectory planning is quite simple and straightforward. So I adopted the concept of segmentize the trajectory, which means that the vehicle will either keep a constant speed or keep a maximum deceleration or acceleration rate to travel through the intersection. This makes the calculation quite easy. As you can see, if you follow that thought, you can simply divide the different cases based on the relationship of green start time and some threshold value. The first threshold value is the earliest possible travel time for the vehicle to arrive at the intersection. For example, if I take an example for case 1, if the earliest arrival time is greater than the green start time, which means the green start time it turns green earlier than its arrival. So the vehicle can just accelerate as it's possible, as fast as possible, since the green is gonna turn green earlier. So that's why you can see the segmentized trajectory, speed trajectories. So others like when the green start time is not that early, not that small, then probably you can find it as a 3-segment trajectory. So that's I will not go for that details, but you can find all the calculation for all those joint point or threshold values. So it's quite simple if you know some basic kinematic equations. So and we can move to our case study. I selected a Superstreet that is situated at Walmart Road and Green Garden Road, and I collected the traffic information from Hammer's work in 2010 and the table of traffic volume and average speed. And I did the simulation in Sumo platform, and it have some nice APIs for you to change the speed and get the simulation results. I run the simulation with different random seeds and keep their duration same for the same experiment. The simulation step length is set as 0.1, so that the trajectory or platooning can be calculated as exactly as possible. The average traffic delay and fuel consumption are the performance indicators, and the acceleration, deceleration, the traffic scales. They are just they are set based on the existing literature. So now we can go to check the results. For the adaptive signal control. In this table of figures, the TD represents the traffic delay and the FS represents the fixed signal timing. OS represents the optimized signal timing. As you can see, the optimized signal timing can bring a lot of improvement for traffic delay and the fuel consumption. And actually, the improvement magnitude is much more superior in Superstreet. Why? Because the Superstreet has only 2 phases and a conventional intersection have 4 phases. So when you have only 2 phases in the cycle length, it actually gives much more flexibility in your optimization. really free the potentiality of optimization. So that's kind of one feature of Superstreet. And I also tested this adaptive signal control with different arm lengths in the Superstreet, like 200 meter, 300 meter, and 400 meter road segment length. And I found that the improvement magnitude is quite stable. And for the platooning control, you can see in the environment of the platooning control can bring benefit in these two environments, both. However, when the traffic volume increases, the platooning give more benefits in the environmental conventional intersection, which is understandable since when you have more vehicle in the conventional intersection, the conventional intersection is going to be more congested, which means there are gonna be more chances for the platooning to be formed, and thus the platooning can give more benefits when the road is more congested. And for the trajectory planning, we can see that the trajectory planning performs better overall in the conventional intersection. Why is that? Because I think in the Superstreet you have multiple signalized intersection, and vehicles are going to experience more stop and go situations in the Superstreet environment, which greatly reduces the benefit of trajectory planning. And so from these results, we can get our conclusions. Adaptive signal control was identified as the most beneficial feature in both Superstreet and conventional intersection. And adaptive signal control performs better in Superstreet. CAV platooning can yield benefit when traffic volume is at a certain level, and platooning performs better in conventional intersection. Trajectory planning also performs better in conventional intersection compared to Superstreet. And that's all for my today's presentation. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you, sir. I wonder if anybody has any questions or comments. I guess I'll just ask a simple question. I'm not sure. I think you did your work at a single intersection. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Here, single intersection. But I'm run multiple simulation runs to test each features.
That's good. And by the way, we're using Sumo for some signal timing work ourselves, and we've had very good luck with it. However, we're trying to work with a network, and that adds a lot of complexity to the situation. But thank you. This is an excellent presentation. Any questions or comments from anybody else? All right, well, in the interest of time, then we'll move on. The third presentation I will present, and the title of this is Covered Survey and Mode Choice Model Development for the University of Texas at Austin. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right, everybody see that?
Yes, sir. We can see that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we at the University of Texas were contacted by a group at the university that is really an environmental group. They're part of the university, and their real interest was to see what could be done to make travel to and from the campus more environmentally sensitive. And so one of the things that we suggested should probably be done is we ought to do a survey to see what modes people are currently using to get to and from the University of Texas campus. And that was sort of the beginning of this process. A few statistics about the University of Texas campus. We have a daytime population of about 70,000 people. We have on campus about 17,000 parking spaces, and that's divided between about 5,000 that are surface spaces and 12,000 that are in garages. We have 9 shuttle bus routes. We purchase service from Capital Metro, the local transit system. We have, over the last several years, we've had an increased movement of students to locations that are close to campus. So walking is a very, very popular mode to get to campus. Bikes and e-scooters are also important. And prior to COVID, we had about 7 different e-scooter vendors in Austin providing about 15,000 e-scooters. We'll talk more about that later, but these are kind of basic statistics. And the people who funded a large portion of this study were very interested in reducing the amount of automobile travel to campus. Well, we hypothesized that the COVID impacts on the campus were probably these 3 things. First, reduced transit use. And I think that's been observed all over the country. Increased auto use. I think that has also been observed in many places across the country, and increased walking. So one of the things we tried to do through this survey was see whether or not these things are really true. We distributed a travel survey last spring, March, April. We sent the survey through a very restricted mailing list, which includes every person associated with UT, students, faculty, staff, every person was included. So we sent about 70,000 potential survey responses out and received about 9,000 responses. That led to sampling fractions of about 6.2% for the 40,900 undergrad students, about 17% for the 11,000 graduate students, about 24% for 13,000 staff, and 23% for nearly 4,000 faculty. We acquired a great deal of information. One of the primary subjects obviously was, what's the primary mode choice? We geocoded the trip origins to the nearest street location since we couldn't ask exact addresses. University wouldn't allow that. We got many details of travel, including whether or not the respondents were aware of transportation services provided by the university, modes used to access primary travel, modes used to complete trips on campus, travel times, and one very interesting piece of information, frequency of campus travel. How frequently do people come to campus, and the reason for choosing primary modes. Oops. We're in the process of trying to get permission. And by the way, getting permission to use this very exclusive mail list that includes everybody at the university is a very, very, very extremely difficult process. We're in the process of trying to repeat this survey right now. In fact, the scheduled time for the second version of the survey was a week ago. We still don't have permission to use the mailing list, but we hope to get it in the near future. Well, if we can do the second survey, we'll get some information that will allow us to look at trends. We can see how the fall 22 students' performance have changed. We have this fall, all the classes are open. And my observation, informal observation, is we have a lot more students on campus. I don't expect to see much difference between the spring and the fall for faculty and staff. More about that in a moment. This is one of the responses. We asked people if they were aware of all these services. The university provides all kinds of services. I noted earlier that we have a pretty well-established shuttle bus system. Most people are aware of that, Capital Metro, Mainline, and Rail UT shuttles. And in fact, if one has a UT ID, one can ride all of the Capital Metro services with no out-of-pocket cost. And so we really encourage public transportation use. Most of the people are aware of most of the programs that are around. We ask how people got from their starting point to the transit stop if they use public transportation, and the vast majority walk, and that's pretty much as expected. We ask why people drove their cars, and really, if you look at the bottom of the chart here, The largest number of people responded that it was the fastest way to get to campus, or that they had no reasonable transit options. And that's probably true, particularly for staff. And they also simply prefer to drive their own vehicle. And so those three are the primary responses. We ask if people carpooled, and there's very, very little carpooling that goes on here. We have a carpool program. You can get carpool permits with reserved spots, but very, very little carpooling that goes on. And then we get to some of the primary information. Looking at the students, the undergraduate students on the left and the graduate students on the right, we ask, what's your primary mode of travel to campus? And you'll note that the red here is walk for undergraduate students, and that's the largest category. I was a little bit surprised that we got only 39%, because I did informal surveys of my classes and a few other classes before this survey was actually conducted. And the numbers that I got were more like 70% of the undergraduate students said they walked to campus. But here we have 39%. Another surprise was the fact that the blue here, this is car, van, motorcycle. 29% of the undergraduates indicated that they travel to campus by car. On the graduate student side, 14% walked. That's somewhat surprising. It should, I think it's probably larger than that now. And a bit of a disappointment here, 39% of the graduate students indicated that they drove cars. So I was a little bit surprised to see the smaller number of walkers and the larger number of car drivers on the student side. We asked what the duration of the walk trips were, and most people walk about 10 to 20 minutes, and that was the primary response. Then looking at faculty and staff, this is no surprise. 73% of the faculty indicate that they drive to campus. 83% of the staff indicate that they drive to campus. And one of the things that we discovered here is there is a bit of an emerging problem for staff in that Austin has been growing very, very rapidly. The cost of housing, certainly near campus, has increased very, very dramatically. And so as staff looks for places to live, staff is tending to live further and further away from campus. And as they live further and further from campus, the likelihood of them having public transportation service becomes less and less. The coverage of Austin's transit is very good in the interior portion of the city, but as you get further and further out, there's less and less service. We recently hired a really good technician in the CE department, and he actually lives in a neighboring city about 30 miles from campus. Not uncommon. So anyway, this is a growing problem. Prices of housing are increasing, and that's forcing staff to live further and further away. Then we got into questions of how frequently do people come to campus, and this turns out to be very, very interesting. We asked people how frequently they do come to campus. And again, we did all this analysis by the 4 basic groups: undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty, and staff. And it turns out that undergraduate students commute less than 5 days about 30%, graduate students about 60%, faculty about 65 to 70%, and staff about 50% of the staff commute to campus less than 5 days. So we did a little bit more detailed analysis of that, and it turns out that as of last spring, the typical undergraduate student was making about 3 trips to campus per week. Graduate students slightly more than 3, faculty a little bit less than 3, and staff only about 2.5 trips per week. So most people were not, in the spring, were not coming to campus every day. These are typical numbers of daily commuters by the typical modes that are available, but in more detail here, average daily commuters by auto to the campus. Remember, we have a daytime population of about 70,000 people, and we have about 17,000 parking spaces on campus. So we have a little under 15,000 auto commuters daily, about 7,500 transit commuters, about 2,700 on bikes, nearly 9,000 walking, for a total of about 33,950. Remember, a daytime population of 70,000. If everybody came, all 70,000 would come every day, but about half of those actually come on a daily basis. Now, the parking traffic enterprise on campus is basically self-supporting, and it's funded by parking permit sales. So let's see what the parking permit sales look like. For last year, 21-22, they sold about 22,400 parking permits. Remember, total spaces available 17,124. The year before, during COVID, they sold a little bit less, close to about 22,000. But if we back up a couple of years, they were selling nearly 40,000 permits per year, 38,251 in 18-19. So one of the impacts of COVID is a lot fewer permits are being sold. I just got numbers from them for the fall of 22, and it turns out the number of permits sold in the fall of 22 is actually less than the total for 21-22. So the guys who were wanting to see less driving to campus actually are getting exactly what they want. We were asked to develop mode choice models that would be complementary to, that would work with the Metropolitan Planning Organization's 4-step model and provide increased resolution of UT trip making and enable focus on auto commuting. Again, we're working for people that want to reduce the amount of auto travel to campus. So we developed a series of nested mode choice models of this form, and the primary predictor variable in all these mode choice models is distance from trip origin to campus centroid. And that's consistent across the whole set of models. We envisioned developing a nest for each of the student, faculty, staff groups. At the top of this nest of models is a model that would split auto versus non-auto travel, and we got adequate sample sizes for all 4 groups to develop good versions of this model. Over here, the next model is to separate the non-auto trips into active transportation and public transportation. Again, sample sizes were very adequate to develop this model for all 4 groups. The model 4, as it's labeled here, is to split active transportation into bikes versus walk. And again, we're able to do that without any problem. We intended to develop a model down here that would break bikes versus e-scooters, but the sample size is really too small to develop this model. So we haven't yet developed it. Hopefully, if we get to do the survey again this fall, we'll get a sample size that will enable that. On this side, we have a model that breaks auto travel into personal car versus ride share. Ride share is a very small fraction, but generally speaking, the sample size is pretty much adequate for us for that model. So we have a nested mode choice concept, developed all the models, and it appears that they will work quite well. And the interesting part about this whole thing is through no effect of our study, the amount of auto travel to and from campus has in fact decreased fairly dramatically. Primarily, it appears, due to COVID. So again, we're attempting to do a second version of the survey this fall to see if, in fact, the COVID impacts have changed. And we're we're optimistic that we'll get a chance to do it, but we haven't been able to do the second version of the survey. Hopefully that'll come in the next few weeks. Any questions, comments?
Hey, Randy, this is Joe. Is the city and the university aware of their problem with affordable housing for staff, and are they doing anything about it?
The university is definitely aware of it. In fact, we're in a really interesting position right now in that our former department chair who moved up to dean is now the provost, Sharon Wood. And so I have a contact at the number 2 level in the university right now, and she's very much aware of it, very much concerned. The university is not the only one. The city of Austin is also concerned about it in a general context, but all the political forces are aware of the problem. Nobody has really come up with a very good solution. The university has taken some steps. The university is in the process of acquiring some apartment complexes on near part of the UT system property that's southwest of the campus. And those apartments are going to be available for new faculty and new staff for a limited time because of the difficulty associated with the price of housing in the area. So the university has taken a little bit of a step. I think there's more that's going to have to be done. And the university and the city are both aware of it, and they're thinking about what to do. But it is a problem. Thank you for the question. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much. I'm going to end my screen share. And our last presentation is by Jin Zhu, University of Connecticut, an enhanced understanding of resilience assessment using points of interest, visit data set under disaster. Jen?
Yes, I'm here. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Randy, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Jing Zhu. I'm assistant professor in Civil and Environmental Engineering Department here at UConn. Today, I'm going to present the work done mainly by my PhD student, Zhen Ren, in the past year, also on the partial funding from CAMMSE. So the title of the presentation is an enhanced understanding of disaster resilience using point of interest, POI visit data set. So the whole idea come up with the increased number of natural disasters and climate change. So we are experiencing more and more disasters. And obviously, we need to improve community resilience, help people better prepare for, adapt to, and recover from disasters. There are many ways to study or examine resilience, and we want to examine this problem from the human mobility patterns. So there are many ways to capture how humans travel and the change of their travel during disaster. Some traditional data set, including self-reporting data. For example, we do survey. There are pros and cons for this type of data. Obviously, it's most direct, like we can directly interact with people and ask many different questions, including their decision-making behavior. However, it's rely on self-reporting. Sometimes it's not reliable and it's very time-consuming, and resource requirement is very high. With more development in technology, now we have a lot of other type of location-based data, such as based on cell phone, GPS signal, or social media. So other type of data, for example, people are using now a neighborhood mobile data. For example, they're studying how people travel from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, from one city to another city during disaster and after disaster. Another type of data recently people are using more is POI visit data, point of interest data. Point of interest basically is defined as a place where people spend time and money, such as a grocery store, or if we come to school, every morning the educational facility is a point of interest, or if you go to purchase construction material in construction, warehouse, it's also another type of point of interest. So by examining how people travel and when they travel and who travel to different type of point of interest, we can kind of understand and get to know how people behave before, during, and after disaster. So a comprehensive understanding of disaster resilience through POI visit is crucial for strategies aimed at better preparing for and responding to future disasters. Right now, when people using this POI data to examine resilience, they are still more focused on the during disaster phase. So if you look at the figure on the left, this is a very traditional resilience triangle. When we talk about resilience triangle, it means we have the premise that the system we're examining is engineering system, which means it has a stable function level. So before anything happens, your systems perform at a certain level. And when perturbations happen to the system, such as a disaster hits, the system will have a functional drop, and then the decrease of function to the lowest point. So the total decrease of the system function is called the impact. It's quantified as the impact of the perturbation or the disaster. And then gradually the system will recover. And the assumption here for this traditional view of resilience is it will go back to the normal, the prior to disaster function level. And then how long it takes for the system to go back to the business as your function level is another measure of the resilience or the impact of disaster. So again, this is how traditionally we view system resilience. However, when we look at different types of systems, we know that not all the system is engineering system, especially when we look at a community, a social technical system. We have human, we have infrastructure, we have organization, we have regulation, etc. A lot of different factors. So usually system does not have a stable function all the time. And after disaster, after disaster has passed, when we go back to when we look at the after disaster phase, the system usually does not go back to the prior disaster function level. It could return back to better. So we usually have a word called build it back to better, or sometimes it never return back to the previous states. So a real world system is much more complex than this engineering system we traditionally see. That's why we want to, and we aim to using point of interest data to have a more holistic understanding of resilience, including different phases of disaster. So recently people starting to look at the preparation disaster using the POI data. They look at, okay, before the disaster hits, how the system, how the system function will increase, or the visitation will increase or decrease, and use it as a measurement of the preparation. To the best of our knowledge, there hasn't been study looking at the after disaster phase, which we call it long-term recovery. So whether after everything happens, after the immediate recovery, whether the system can really build it back to better, or it never returned as good as a previous status. So the whole research objective of this study or this exploration is to develop methodology to measure POI visit behaviors across different disaster stages with quantitative indicators, so we get a better understanding of resilience of a community. So this flowchart shows the methodology we adopt. First, we select certain disaster and affected cities. In this specific study, we mainly look at a hurricane, because hurricane is a type of disaster that really, it leaves some window for people to have preparation. And again, also hurricane is a recurring event. So especially, for example, in Florida, in Texas, it happens almost every year and multiple times a year. So we can showing that the long-term recovery and see it as the preparation for the next disaster. That's why we select this type of disaster. And then after we selected the disaster type and affected cities, we will capture the POI visit by different categories. For example, we have the construction, manufacturing, education, insurance, healthcare, etc., and aggregate a POI visit of specific geographic areas and specific categories. And then we were come up with a baseline POI visit for a specific geographic area and a specific sector. So the baseline, basically, we get some data from the region when it is not affected by disaster at all. We pick the 1 month before the disaster hit and calculate a baseline POI visit. And then also we calculate POI visit under the influence of the disaster we're examining. And then compare these two, we can calculate the percentage change of POI visit in a specific geographic area, in a specific sector. And then since we look at different phases of disaster, we can calculate a pre-disaster effect indicator associated with a pre-disaster stage. We calculate impact indicator associated with a during disaster stage, and we calculate a residual effect indicator associated with a post-disaster stage. In the following slides, I will explain how we define these different stages. And then compare these three indicators, we can kind of capture the POI visit patterns of a specific geographic area under the influence of disaster. And then by comparing different geographic areas, comparing different POI categories, we can get insights of resilience. So explaining of some details of the methodology. First, how we differentiate different stages of a disaster. Here I mean hurricane, and how we calculate the percentage changes of POI visit. So first, we define 3 stages of the disaster. For hurricane, we consider the last 7 days before the hurricane landfall as a pre-disaster phase, when people can really implement certain preparation and do things they want to do before disaster hits. And then from the days that the hurricane had the landfall until when the POI visit returned to the business as usual condition, we call it a during disaster phase. And then 1 month from the date when the POI visit returned to business as usual, we call it a post-disaster phase. So you may recall that I said that in some circumstances, POI visit never returned to business as usual condition. So we also consider this. So if that's the case, then we consider there's no post-disaster phase for that geographic area under the influence of this disaster. And then how we calculate the percentage change of the POI visit. There are 3 steps. First, from the raw data, you can see this first figure on the top right. This is a raw data of the visit count of in a specific geographic location for specific, for example, POI sector. And then we calculate the 7-day rolling average to alleviate the daily outliers and also generate a smoother trend. So the second figure here, you see that we already calculated 7-day rolling average of the visit counts. And then we use this equation. For every day, we use a daily point of interest visit on the disaster, which on the disaster is this purple curve minus a daily baseline POI visit. So which is the blue curve here divided by the daily baseline POI visit. And then we can calculate the percentage change curve of the POI visit. And then we mainly use this curve and separate it into 3 phases to define the pattern. So for the pre-disaster effect, we see that there can be 2 circumstances. One is that there's some pre-disaster effects, which means we can see that before the landfall of the hurricane, there's some obvious increase in the visitation of a certain POI or POI visits. We define it as a preparation. For example, we know that before hurricane hits, the residents in a certain area, they usually rush to the grocery store to purchase water, or they need to go to Home Depot to purchase some plywood to protect their window. So that's why we see that in certain sector, in certain area, there are certain preparation effects. There's kind of abnormal increase in their visitation. Obviously, in some areas, we don't see that, and then we define it, there's no pre-disaster effects or no preparation in that sector, in that area. And then for the impact indicator, this is the traditional way we calculate and assess resilience. Basically, we calculate the shaded area here. The shaded area size is a measure of the magnitude of disaster impact because it captures the decrease in the function level and also the duration of the recovery. And then for the third phase, which is the disaster recovery, we calculate the indicator called residual effects indicator. Basically, we identify 3 possible patterns. One is a recovery beyond normal, which means 1 month after the POI visit, return back to normal. We constantly see that it compared with previous function level, the POI visit is constantly above 10%, positive 10%. So in this figure, we can see that it's constantly higher than before. And then there's a second possibility is recovery back to normal, which means it has some fluctuation, but it's almost like it's within 10 plus or minus 10% of the previous visitation level. And then there's a last possibility is recovery below normal, which means it never come back to the previous visitation. We can simply imagine in some circumstances, if the impact is really high and it takes very long term and it has destructive impact to a certain area or to a certain sector, in the short term, for example, 1 month, 2 months, it will be very hard for it to get back to the previous active level. So with this definition, now we can define 6 different patterns of a specific geographic area and a specific sector. It can be no preparation, but recovery beyond normal, no preparation, recovery back to normal, no preparation, recovery below normal, or it can be with preparation, recovery beyond normal, with preparation, recovery back to normal, and with preparation, recovery below normal. So this is a kind of a simple explanation of the methodology. Now I will show quickly a case study we implemented and some preliminary findings we obtained from the case study. So we picked the case study of Hurricane Michael, which had a landfall on October 10th, 2018. It's a major hurricane, first category 5 hurricane to make the landfall in United States since Hurricane Andrew in 1992, and it caused the significant impact. It has a landfall in Florida near Machemehl Beach, and then went all the way to the north. So we picked 4 cities. 3 of them are in the direct landfall areas, including Panama City Beach, and Lynn Haven. So they are all in the Bay County area, very close to the landfall location. And then in addition, we picked Tallahassee, which is in Lynn County. The reason we picked this Tallahassee is we want to do some comparison, see, okay, the heavily impacted geographic areas and less affected areas, what's the difference in the different indicators we just introduced. And then we get the POI visitation data set from the SafeGraph company. We get the data for both September to calculate our baseline and the data in October and November to calculate the during disaster phase and the disaster recovery phase. So first we calculate the city level POI visit pattern and did a comparison. Here you can see that the 4 cities, the curves of their POI visit, and also the 3 indicators, the pre-disaster effect, impact, and residual effects. We can see that first, for the 3 cities, Panama City Beach, and Lynn Haven, their impact indicator is much higher in the absolute number compared with Tallahassee. So this is kind of validation of the methodology because we know that in reality, these 3 cities are much heavily hit. And then we examine the pre-disaster effects. It's interesting, we see that the Panama City Beach had a much higher preparation, followed by Lynn Haven and Panama City. And in Tallahassee, it's nearly no preparation, which again makes sense because probably people in Tallahassee know that there won't be such heavy impact. And then we see that the residual effects in Panama City Beach, it has higher residual effects, and also Tallahassee. Again, this makes sense because Tallahassee, the residual effects a little bit higher, although we can still consider it's recovery back to normal. Tallahassee, the residual effects is higher because it was not affected heavily anyway. Panama City Beach is the residual effects, which means the activity level 1 month after hurricane hit and recovery and have the shortened recovery is because it has a higher level of preparation compared with Panama City and Lynn Haven. And the next step we do is we look at the different sectors. So basically we use the North American industry classification system and examine the different sectors related with different function and needs of community residents, including construction, manufacturing, wholesale trades, retail trades, financial insurance, healthcare, etc. And we capture the different patterns for each city and each sector. So the first observation we find here is there's no uniform pattern. Here we use a color coding to represent one of the 4 patterns we mentioned. So there's no uniform pattern, which means if we really want to know what's happening regarding this POI visit and the resilience resilience levels in each city, in each sector, we need to look into more the functions of each sector and also the social demographic fact features and also the other information of different city. However, when we compare the 3 cities that are more heavily impacted with Tallahassee, which is less heavily impacted, we see that Tallahassee, it has a less diverse pattern, which means like there are 1 or 2 more dominated patterns. Why in Panama City Beach, and Lynn Haven, the patterns are more diverse. And then we look at like specific sectors. For example, in the construction related sector, we know that people need to go to these places, for example, to purchase construction material, plywood to protect their window and doors, or some contractors will have more activity during this phase because people are requesting them to help. And we compare the 3 more heavily affected cities. We see that the pre-disaster effect indicator and the impact indicator are positive correlated, which means if you have more preparation, then you will have less impact. So this is an interesting finding. And then all cities are able to recover beyond normal, which means construction sector will have a long-term impact due to hurricane. And we can also see that as a preparation for the next disaster, because after one hurricane hit, people now may have a better awareness of the preparations they need to do to protect and mitigate risk associated with their house. The second sector we examined is and show here is manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector basically show how people prepare to respond to and recover from the ability to work because it's related with factory. And here again, we show that the preparation indicator, the impact indicator, residual effects indicator are positively correlated. So again, if you have more preparation, then your impact will be less and your residual effects will be higher, which means you can quickly and better resume the manufacturing activities. The last sector we find here is education service sector. So different with the previous 2 sectors. Now we see a constant trend across these three cities that they have a recovery below normal pattern. This is because education service usually have a more flexible nature. So for example, after disaster hits, we could change some of the educational activities, for example, to online mode, or we can shift certain activities to a further date. You don't have to do some immediate action regarding this education. And it also shows that there may be this long-lasting effect in the educational service because of disaster. So the contribution of this study is we propose a methodology can measure POI visit at different phases of disaster, and we do some preliminary investigation and find the correlations between the pre-preparation, impact, and long-term residual effects of disasters, which help us have a holistic understanding of response, of preparation, response, and recovery, and mitigation of disasters. Some future work, we are going to explore visit patterns in more detailed POI categories, because on there, for example, the retail or construction, there's some steered detailed level of POI categories. And also we are going to combine the visitor social demographic characteristics to investigate which contribute to ultimately different patterns of the POI during disaster. So with this, I conclude my presentation, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. That's wonderful, wonderful presentation. Questions, comments from anybody? There being none, Wei, I think we're a couple minutes over time. I apologize for that, but I think I'll return it to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think we're going to take a break. We will come back about 10:30 a.m., which is 7 minutes away. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all.